So, if you look at the aggregated forecasting data from May 2026, I mean, we're talking thousands of predictions pulled from various research institutes, geopolitical models, all that stuff.
Right.
They're suggesting approximately a 2% probability of human extinction by the year 2100.
Which is, frankly, a number that just sits very strangely in the human brain, you know?
Oh, it really does, yeah. Well, welcome back to part 2 of our Kardashev scales series. For those of you joining us on this deep dive today, our mission is basically to take this massive stack of recent forecasting models and try to figure out if humanity can actually survive its own technological adolescence.
Yeah, because based on the Kardashev scale, humanity is currently sitting at type 0.73, right? We haven't even fully harnessed the energy of our own planet yet.
Exactly. And to reach type 1, which is, a fully integrated planetary civilization, we have to survive what certain researchers call the transition window.
And that window is arguably the most dangerous bottleneck any intelligent species can face.
Because it's the gap, right?
Yeah, it's the gap between discovering planetary scale destructive power and, well, actually developing the planetary scale wisdom to use that power responsibly.
Which we definitely do not have yet.
No, not at all. I mean, you have the physics and the engineering to alter the atmosphere or level continents, but your political systems, your cognitive biases, they're still running on software built for, like, ancient tribal survival.
Right.
And we are currently sitting directly inside that window.
Which kind of brings us back to that 2% figure from the May data.
Yeah.
I have to admit, when I first read that, my immediate reaction was, well, conditional optimism.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, 2% sounds incredibly small.
Yeah.
It sounds entirely manageable.
Yeah.
If an airline told you, hey, there's a 98% chance your flight lands perfectly without a hitch, you would board that plane without a second thought.
You'd probably sleep through the turbulence.
Exactly.
But see, that's a natural reaction because our brains are calibrated for everyday risk, not existential probability.
Right.
We really need to reframe what 2% actually means here.
Okay. How so?
Well, it's roughly 1 in 50. So imagine a bowl of 50 jelly beans on a table, right?
Okay.
49 of them are just cherry flavored. But one immediately ends your entire lineage, erases all of human history, and fundamentally extinguishes the human story.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
Suddenly, reaching into that bowl doesn't feel like a negligible risk, does it?
No. I mean, you wouldn't go anywhere near that bowl.
Right. And furthermore, your airline analogy assumes a highly regulated, known environment. Like, if we were tracking a civilization-ending asteroid, we'd have a natural timeline. We could see it coming decades in advance.
We could calculate the orbital mechanics and all that?
Exactly. But the threats making up this 2% probability, they follow no natural timeline. They are inherently unpredictable because they're generated by us.
Ah, I see.
That's why various researchers analyzing these models consider even a 1% risk to be completely unacceptable when the stakes are literally human survival.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's look at the actual mechanisms driving that 1 in 50 chance. Let's move from the abstract math to the oldest, most immediate planetary threat sitting inside our transition window, which is nuclear arsenals.
Yeah, the classic existential threat.
Right, because it's incredibly easy to compartmentalize this as a historical relic of, like, the late 20th century. But the architectural flaws in our current command and control systems are, I mean, they're terrifyingly present.
They really are. I'd argue they're the defining feature of our current technological adolescence. Right now, global nuclear arsenals operate on an architecture known as launch on warning.
Launch on warning, okay.
Yeah, and the underlying logic of that architecture is built entirely on the fear of losing your deterrent before you can use it.
Right, because if you wait to verify that an incoming strike has actually detonated on your soil, your own silos might already be destroyed.
Exactly. So launch on warning essentially means the system is designed to prioritize speed over human deliberation.
We've basically automated the escalation phase.
Yes. If a nation's early warning radar detects an incoming anomaly, the protocol dictates that a retaliatory strike must be launched before those incoming bogeys actually land. We're talking about a decision window of perhaps 3 to 8 minutes.
3 to 8 minutes, that's it.
That is the entire window for a human leader to authorize a civilization-altering counterstrike.
Which completely removes any human buffer of time. I mean, a false alarm, a degraded sensor, some localized software glitch that they could theoretically trigger a catastrophic response before any analyst has time to properly verify the data, right?
Or pick up a diplomatic channel to de-escalate.
Yeah.
We are trusting the survival of a type 0.73 civilization to the structural integrity of aging early warning sensors.
Okay, but let me push back on the inevitability of this for a second. Because objectively, global warhead counts have decreased significantly since their historical peaks decades ago.
They have, yes.
And we have survived decades of this exact standoff. Doesn't that structural reduction in the sheer volume of weapons give us a tangible reason to be slightly optimistic?
Well, the reduction in total warheads is positive, sure, but some researchers propose it's a dangerous illusion of safety.
Why?
Because fewer warheads do not necessarily mean decreased systemic risk. The delivery systems today, like hypersonic glide vehicles, stealth architectures, they are significantly faster.
Oh, which compresses that 3 to 8 minute decision window even further.
Exactly. And as for surviving decades of the standoff, the historical records show us that we essentially just got lucky. And I mean that in the most literal sense.
You're talking about the incident in the 1980s, right?
I am. There was a specific incident in 1983 where a military officer monitoring early warning radar systems saw clear, systemic confirmation that 5 incoming ballistic missiles had been launched.
5 missiles.
Yeah. The alarms were blaring. The protocol dictated immediate retaliation. The only reason we are having this conversation today is because that specific individual broke protocol.
He just refused to pass the warning up the chain.
Right. He reasoned that a real first strike would likely involve hundreds of missiles, not 5, so he chose to report it as system malfunction.
And it turned out to be, what, sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds?
Yep. Sunlight on clouds. Relying on sheer luck and individual insubordination to bypass flawed architecture is not a sustainable survival strategy.
No, clearly not.
No.
And the really crucial point here is that we don't even need a global full-scale exchange to trigger an existential bottleneck.
No, we don't.
If we look at the atmospheric modeling, certain researchers warn that a geographically localized exchange between 2 regional powers would still be a global catastrophe.
Because the mechanism isn't just the immediate blast radius, it's the atmospheric shock.
Right. The firestorms generated by burning urban centers would inject millions of tons of black carbon soot directly into the stratosphere.
Where it just sits above the weather system so it doesn't wash out with the rain.
It just spreads across the globe and blocks out a massive percentage of incoming sunlight.
Exactly. You experience a sudden, radical drop in global temperatures, a nuclear winter effect.
So it wouldn't just be a localized geopolitical tragedy.
No, it could induce sudden, massive global agricultural failure. The primary threat to human survival in that scenario is the rapid, catastrophic inability to feed the global population.
Which provides a really dark but conceptually perfect transition into the next major threat in our window.
Yeah, the climate models.
Exactly. Because that sudden agricultural failure driven by atmospheric shock maps identically onto the slow-moving cascade of agricultural failure we're already watching unfold due to climate tipping points.
Right.
And we need to be precise with our terminology here for you listening. The forecasting models aren't just looking at climate change like, the incremental warming of temperatures. Some researchers are modeling the risk of climate collapse.
Right, which is the critical difference between a biological system under manageable stress and a system experiencing multi-organ failure. Climate collapse means the structural breakdown of predictable weather patterns that human agriculture relies upon.
And to anchor this in the immediate data, we have a very sobering milestone from last year. We're seeing reports that certain island nations are already issuing permanent climate refugee documentation for populations facing total displacement.
It's unbelievable.
It really is. This isn't a temporary evacuation protocol for a severe hurricane season. This is the permanent structural loss of a homeland due to rising sea levels and encroaching salinity in freshwater tables.
It is a devastating reality. But when geopolitical analysts view climate collapse through the lens of existential risk to humanity as a whole, they classify it primarily as a threat multiplier.
A threat multiplier, not just a standalone event.
Right. It's rarely framed as a standalone event where the water just slowly gets higher until it's over. Instead, the mechanism of climate collapse acts as a massive accelerant on every single existing fault line in human society.
Because it drives the fundamental mechanics of conflict, doesn't it?
Exactly.
If predictable weather patterns collapse, you experience compounding crop failures. Sustained crop failures create massive calorie deficits and food shortages. Food shortages inevitably lead to hyperinflation and severe economic instability, which forces mass human migration.
And then that migration stresses the borders and resources of neighboring regions.
which rapidly escalates into resource wars. It takes whatever baseline geopolitical tension currently exists in the world and structurally forces it to a breaking point.
Precisely. It actively degrades the very institutions, the economic stability, and the international trust that we desperately need to solve our other complex problems.
Right. And when you have nations competing over dwindling resources, you inherently incentivize an arms race for any technological advantage.
Yeah. Which brings us to the technological wildcard of the 21st century.
Artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah, there's a highly debated research paper published in November 2025 that attempted to quantify whether an AI-driven catastrophe is actually a probable scenario.
See, AI represents a completely unprecedented variable because we're engineering something that, by its very definition, is designed to be better at optimization and problem solving than we are.
But the spectrum of risk operates on two different axes, right?
Yeah. On one hand, you have incredibly powerful, narrow AI models. These don't need to be self-aware to be dangerous.
They just do specific tasks flawlessly.
Exactly. Like optimizing supply chains or, more concerningly, automating cyber warfare, discovering zero-day exploits at scale, or generating undetectable disinformation campaigns to fracture political systems.
But the other axis is the theoretical risk of a recursively self-improving system, a model that doesn't just process data, but can actually write better, more efficient code for its successor.
You get an intelligence explosion.
Right, an intelligence explosion that vastly exceeds human cognitive capabilities across all domains.
Yes, and compounding both of those risks is the physical mechanism of how this technology is currently built.
The compute power.
Exactly, the concentration of computational infrastructure. The sheer volume of physical data centers, specialized microchips, and energy grids required to train these frontier models means the capability to build them is entirely centralized in the hands of a very small number of actors.
And that kind of centralized, opaque power is inherently destabilizing to global security architectures.
Right.
Okay, but I had to push back on the forecasting models here for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
Because when you look at the raw data from these research papers, the expert consensus is completely fractured. I mean, estimates from certain researchers range from under 1% to over 80%.
Yeah, it's a massive spread.
When I see a statistical spread that massive, my immediate instinct is that these models are just guessing. Is this just an evasion of the data?
I get why you'd think that. It looks like guesswork, but it's actually a profound reflection of genuine scientific uncertainty, not evasion. Let's compare it to climate modeling. When climatologists model atmospheric changes, they're mapping physical systems, right? Carbon parts per million, thermal dynamics, ocean currents. We understand the physical laws governing those systems.
Sure.
But when analysts attempt to model the trajectory of artificial intelligence, they are trying to predict the development path of an immaterial technology that has no natural physical limits.
Because intelligence isn't bound by the speed of light or the boiling point of water.
Exactly. AI development follows no natural timeline. It isn't a biological evolutionary process. Its trajectory is entirely dependent on human capital allocation, infrastructure investment, and algorithmic breakthroughs.
So a paradigm-shifting breakthrough could happen 10 years from now, or it could happen next Tuesday.
Yes. That massive spread from 1% to 80% is the scientific community being radically honest. They're essentially stating that the error bars on surviving the specific technological transition are wider than anything our species has ever faced.
Wow. Okay, so if artificial intelligence is this wild card capable of hyper-optimizing complex data, let's look at the mechanism of what happens when that capability interacts with biology.
Oh, this is where it gets really concerning.
Because AI fundamentally treats complex systems like readable code. Right. And that leads us directly to the threat of engineered pandemics.
This is a textbook example of how the acceleration of one technology actively weaponizes another. Biology is staggeringly complex, but at its foundational level, it is an information system.
DNA is biological code.
Exactly. And AI models excel at reading, predicting, and optimizing code. We already have AI systems capable of predicting the 3D structures of millions of proteins in a matter of hours. That's a task that used to take human researchers their entire careers.
So we really have to draw a hard mechanical line between a natural biological threat and an engineered one. A natural pandemic, as devastating as it is fundamentally constrained by the laws of natural evolution.
It has to obey evolutionary trade-offs, yes. Generally speaking, in nature, a virus faces a biological tension between transmissibility and lethality.
Meaning, if a pathogen is too lethal too quickly, it just burns out.
Right. It kills its host before the host has a chance to walk into a crowded room and spread it?
But a lab-engineered pathogen completely circumvents that evolutionary trade-off.
Because it doesn't have to play by nature's rules.
Right. You can theoretically optimize a virus to have an incredibly long asymptomatic incubation period so it spreads undetected globally for weeks, combined with a hyperlethal onset once that window closes.
It's designed with an intended outcome. It bypasses natural constraints entirely.
But surely the geopolitical apparatus sees this coming, right? If we look at global governance, certain international bodies finalized a pandemic preparedness agreement in 2025 after years of grueling negotiation.
They did, yeah.
We are actively building diplomatic frameworks to monitor biolabs and restrict dangerous pathogen research. So why do these forecasting models still rate biological risk so highly if the international community is actively signing treaties to prevent it?
Because of the massive disparity between the speed of diplomacy and the democratization of biotechnology.
The governance gap.
Exactly. An international agreement requires years of bureaucratic negotiation, parliamentary ratification, and complex enforcement mechanisms. In that exact same window of time, the financial cost of synthesizing custom DNA drops exponentially.
And the computational models required to design novel pathogens are increasingly becoming open source or easily accessible online.
Right. You don't need a massive state-sponsored biological weapons facility anymore. The physical footprint required for advanced biotechnology is shrinking rapidly.
We're approaching a point where the equipment necessary to synthesize dangerous biological material could fit on a desktop.
Yes. Biotech accessibility inherently increases systemic risk over time, regardless of what treaties are signed. The democratization of information is generally the engine of human progress, but the democratization of potential weapons of mass destruction is a mathematical recipe for catastrophe.
Which forces us to look at how all these pieces fit together.
Yeah.
Because when you read the latest research on systemic risk frameworks, the overriding conclusion is that none of these threats exist in a vacuum.
No, they don't.
We naturally want to categorize them to make them manageable. We put nuclear risk in one bucket, climate in another, AI and biorisk in another.
But the global architecture doesn't use buckets. It operates as a highly sensitive, interconnected web.
Exactly. It's the systemic interaction. If you connect the mechanisms we've just discussed, you realize they can form a catastrophic feedback loop.
Let's walk through that loop.
Okay, so climate stress triggers widespread agricultural failure. That creates intense resource scarcity, which inevitably drives geopolitical conflict and border crises.
Right. And that conflict degrades the international trust and cooperation required to monitor biolabs or maintain arms control treaties.
And then the degradation of trust increases the probability of a nation utilizing engineered biological weapons or stumbling into an automated nuclear exchange.
And sitting in the center of all this is artificial intelligence, acting as a massive accelerant. It speeds up the design of biological weapons, automates cyber warfare against energy grids, and compresses the decision-making windows of global leaders.
It's a tightly coupled system.
When one node is placed under extreme stress, the structural integrity of all the other nodes weakens. And because humanity is still a type 0.73 civilization, our governance structures are deeply fragmented, which makes organizing a unified, coordinated response incredibly difficult.
Okay, but I want to interject a different angle on that systemic interaction, because if we only look at the downward spiral, we ignore the historical reality of human adaptation.
What do you mean?
Well, if these threats are all happening simultaneously, and they are all interconnected, doesn't the sheer unavoidable pressure of mitigating one threat inadvertently force us to build the frameworks to solve the others?
Oh, I see where you're going.
Like, if climate collapse is this massive, undeniable cliff approaching us, does the desperate biological imperative to survive it force humanity to develop highly aligned, safe AI to invent new carbon capture technologies? Does the pressure of the transition window actually forge the global cooperation required to survive it?
That is the exact mechanism of conditional optimism that we really have to embrace. The core hope within these forecasting models is that the staggering magnitude of these interacting threats acts as a forcing function for civilizational maturity. To physically solve the math of climate collapse, you are fundamentally forced to develop unprecedented international transparency and cooperation. Building that transparency creates the exact geopolitical trust necessary to finally dismantle hair-trigger nuclear architectures.
And if you successfully engineer safe AI models to manage global power grids, You inherently establish the safety frameworks required to govern future superintelligence.
Exactly. The systemic interaction can trigger a vicious collapse, but it can just as easily forge a virtuous cycle of survival. The threats are deeply interconnected, but the solutions are equally bound together.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for you, listening to this deep dive. Can we actually navigate this? Can a fragmented species safely pass through the transition window?
And if we're being completely intellectually honest, looking at all the models and the data, we do not have a definitive answer.
Nobody does. A Type 0 civilization has never done this before. There is no historical precedent for a species navigating a bottleneck composed of multiple, overlapping, self-imposed existential threats.
No, there's no instruction manual buried in the ice somewhere.
Right. We're essentially building the airplane while we're in free fall, and we've just realized that half the passengers have brought their own conflicting blueprints for the engine.
That is exactly what it feels like. But it's important to recognize that every single generation in human history has faced deep existential fears. Our ancestors looked up at the sky and feared the unpredictable wrath of nature, famines that wiped out regions, plagues that decimated empires.
But this generation occupies a completely unique position in the timeline of our species. We are the first humans in history where the existential threats we face are not primarily coming from the outside world.
No, they're entirely of our own making.
We've stepped out of a reality where risks were natural and predictable. We engineered the incredibly complex, messy systems that currently threaten to destroy us. But that inherently means we also possess the capacity, the intelligence, and the agency to engineer the systems that could save us.
Global coordination isn't just a political buzzword anymore. It is the ultimate, non-negotiable test for reaching Type 1.
It's the final exam. And as you think about that 2% probability we talked about at the start, I want to leave you with one final unresolved thought to mull over. When we look up at the night sky, we see billions of stars, countless galaxies, infinite potential for life. Yet the universe is entirely silent. We've heard absolutely nothing. No signals, no radio waves, no evidence of vast Type 1 planetary civilizations.
The great silence.
Yeah. Perhaps that silence is the most terrifying data point of all. Perhaps the reason the stars are so quiet is because every single civilization that came before us eventually reached their own transition window and failed the test.